Introduction. This video is an interview with a Polish non-binary Jewish anarchist providing a personal perspective on the socio-political situation of Poland from the Soviet era to current year, 2021. The video is about an hour long, during which I ask 18 specific questions on a range of issues, which I'll summarize here. 1. Poland's current political situation. 2. Polish attitudes towards leftism. 3. Polish leftist movements today. 4. Poland during the Soviet era. 5. LGBTQ issues in current-day Poland. 6. Common misconceptions about Poland. In the video description, I have placed timestamps to each of the 18 specific questions asked and answered. Use the timestamps to navigate the content. How would you describe the political situation in your country at present?
The current government is social conservative, and Poland is a parliamentary democracy. I mean, the democracy other than, being capitalist, which is really not democratic. But we are slowly getting towards like a more authoritarian sort of state with many people in courts being replaced, especially judges, and the ruling party, the PIS, is increasing in power. Currently, we are still this democratic country with a social conservative government, but they're more conservative than they're social.
So you would say technically Democrat, but also kind of more leaning towards authoritarian capitalism, like socially authoritarian. Would you describe it as neoliberal?
I don't know if I would say it's neoliberal, because like the previous government was very neoliberal. The current one is like more quote unquote left wing in terms of politics, but there's still, not quite social democracy, but I wouldn't call it quite neoliberal.
Okay, that's useful. So do you mean they are politically a little bit more left, even though socially they're more conservative?
Yes, they're very conservative socially, but economically they're a bit more left-leaning.
Yeah, that's an interesting combination.
Quite rare globally, but happens sometimes.
On that question then, that leads to the next question, which is, what is the general attitude toward leftism in your country?
People tend to largely be pretty conservative, and like among young people, especially in urban areas, it tends to be more leftist, or at least like accepting of leftist beliefs. But like also the problem that many people who see themselves as leftists actually are like they are often pro-feminism and pro queer rights, but very often they're really right-wing economically, which is quite, troubling. Like the thing I see very often among people, like even in progressive spaces, they're horribly classy.
What do you think is the reason for that? Are there any underlying causes you could identify?
I think firstly it's a bit of like a youth rebellion against like the establishment, which is like, relatively left-leaning economically and very conservative socially, which is what leads people to, pretty right-wing economically and left-wing culturally. And I think it's also because like there hasn't really been much of an economic leftist movement since the fall of communism, because like in a kind of socialist movement or
Right.
that communist, everyone thinks of the Polish People's Republic and authoritarian.
Do you think there's this kind of maybe a bit of a residual reaction to the Soviet era?
Yes, like that's certainly a thing that plays into like how like the two biggest parties, like the leader of the PIS is basically called like the civic platform, the second biggest party, a far left party, and in response they called him a socialist, because being called a socialist or a communist is just an insult in Poland. Like it doesn't matter what you have or what your political opinions is, just like the way you're gonna communist or socialist.
So that basically gets used as a kind of a slur or a way of delegitimizing people.
Yeah, and basically, like when someone identifies as socialist, so someone identified, like as stupid or something like that, but basically no one takes them serious.
I see. What then is the cause of the social conservatism? It's kind of interesting to me that Poland, like a number of the other Soviet bloc countries, was under Soviet influence for a long time. And we hear a lot about the socialist and the Soviet system being very socially progressive and giving rights to women and being more progressive, apparently, than the West. And yet, in so many of these post Soviet bloc countries, there's generally speaking quite a strong social conservatism. Is that a backlash against genuine Soviet progressivism? Or is it just that the Soviets didn't quite manage to produce a very progressive society in the first place? Or a bit of both or something else?
So to go about like, firstly, it is that the church was was very important to the opposition. It was during the Polish Republic, and
Right.
it was like very, and government really disliked church reform. It's always been a very Catholic country, so
Mm,
with like big influence of church on politics, it is obviously going to be at least somewhat conservative.
yeah,
And
right.
secondly, the thing is, I wouldn't really say that the at least the Polish citizens were very like progressive. I mean, maybe when compared to like the USA, where they had racial segregation and things like that. But I mean, in terms of feminism, they were like somewhat progressive, but still not very. And
Mm,
like women would work and get, but the wage gap still existed, and there were some actions that tried to get more feminism, but most of the government was quite sexist, and basically like every like important person in politics was a man, and
right.
what's more, and there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and there still
Yeah,
is in the.
yeah, of course. That's really interesting to me. So during the Soviet era, that social conservatism, which was probably still largely generated by the church, even though the church was suppressed, that was kind of still in the background. And that was the cause of this residual social conservatism, even during the Soviet era, would you say?
Well, in a big part certainly, and probably also I'd say that there were some progress elements among the communist parties, but they never quite got to power. Like they had to have some popularity, even if it was an authoritarian regime, and like
Right.
most Poles were conservative socially, so it led to the people who are not really conservative having less power than the
Ah,
ones who were.
okay, that's interesting. Right. So actually, then the people in control or the people in power, political power during the Soviet era were more conservative anyway. So, and the people who were more progressive just unlikely or less likely to gravitate to the positions of power and therefore less influential.
Yes, like it was kind of like that, and it was a bit of a feedback loop because the government is conservative, so people like kind of buy into at least some of the propaganda, and then the people are more conservative, and the government has to somewhat
Ah, I
go
see. Right. So
popularity.
that's interesting. So the government was actually concerned about responding to popular perceptions of them. And
At
therefore,
least,
if the people were conservative, then they wouldn't push the people too far progressively. Is that what you mean?
yeah, like obviously they weren't a democracy, but they still needed to have some popularity in themselves in power, so they couldn't like why go completely against the people's will.
Okay, that's fascinating. Yeah, I really had no idea of this before, but it explains a lot, certainly in Poland's situation. So you end up with this Soviet era socialist style or socialist ideal style government, which is to some extent limited in the amount of progress or social progress it can implement due to this intrinsic conservative inertia, I guess, of the society that
But
they.
actually, like also it's mainly like later on because early on the Polish, both like Poland in general and the Polish government were relatively progressive on the global scale. Like
Oh,
in the
really?
50s, just that, like, for example, even during the interwar period, homosexuality wasn't penalized, which
Oh,
was kind
right.
of,
So earlier on, it was more socially progressive, and then it became kind of.
yes,
Mm,
because like it didn't really change its position socially that much, whilst the war went forward and
right.
things
Yeah.
like this,
Sure.
homosexuality stopped being progressive ideals and became kind of like an obvious thing to most
Right.
countries.
So the current situation, the current socialist conservative situation in Poland, then, is quite a complex combination of various factors over time, with this ebb and flow of conservatism and progressivism, right?
Yeah.
Wow, this is really interesting. I wasn't aware of this. It's much more complex than I thought. And yeah, I was really wondering why Poland ended up with this very strong social conservatism. So that helps explain that, certainly. That leads on to our next question, which is, are there any significant leftist, socialist, or political movements or parties in your country?
Also, like, as for like actually socialist movements, there are basically known. Like, there are some like far left activists who are very active, but they aren't popular. So there are a few people who just go who do a lot of stuff, but they're not quite like very numerous. And there is the coalition of three parties that's called, currently there are two parties because two of them merged. It's the New Left, no, it's the Left, sorry, one of the parties, the New Left, and
Mm,
basically they're like the only hope in the leftist force over parliamentary politics. Like, well, people on their far left, like me, half of them view them as little better than liberals.
mm,
I would,
mm.
because, like they're better than the
Better than
others, but
nothing. Better than nothing. Right?
yeah, but there's social democrats, so there's only so much thing.
Would they be a significant political force in Poland, would you say?
Well, after the next election, they might become a significant force if the polls are shown right, because they don't have that much popularity, but they will have like enough people to so that the civic coalition, needs them to form a
Oh,
coalition
right.
so that the PIS win the elections. So that might happen, but it also might not.
Do they have sufficient influence to be a decider in, say, a balance of power?
They might be, but I mean, they sometimes have, certainly have some influence even now, but they're, even if this coalition does come into existence, certainly the main body of choice will be the civic coalition bigger. So, like, the left isn't in any way in control, and as currently, like, PIS has most of the seats in the Sejm and almost half of them in Senate, so they can basically do whatever they want.
So they still
They're
have.
losing,
Sorry, go ahead. Yep.
but the PIS is losing popularity now, so they might become like a bigger force after the next elections, unless they collapse on themselves. There's a lot of conflict in this region. You know how that is.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. If you're comfortable describing it, are you a member of any leftist social or political movements or parties?
Yes, I am a member of a trade union. It's
Hmm.
called the Workers' Initiative. I mean, I'm not very much employed full time. I'm part of the youth circle where we basically support the main trade union and, well, go on protests, make banners, help create maybe some local workplaces, stuff like that. In
Yeah,
general.
sure. That's interesting. You mentioned that you're a member of this work union. Of course, the workers' unions were famous for being the foundation and the driving force during the Solidarność movement. How do you see
Yeah.
the role of the workers' unions today? Do they still have that same kind of influence, or is there something else going on?
So nowadays, trade unions have way less influence than they did then, and like later on during the martial law period, when it's like introduced late on before the collapse of the Polish Solidarność, Republic, so the like or the workers movement within Solidarność was like very much destroyed. A lot of people, were put in prisons. The
Oh, right.
trade was destroyed, and it turned into a much more like political movement, which was also like less left wing politically. So basically, so nowadays Solidarność still exists as a trade union, but basically doesn't do anything. We need
Right.
to support the current government. Like in the public sector, there are a lot of unions, but like there are too many of them, and they get into conflict like all the time, and they cannot really know when to do stuff. Whereas in private sector, there are basically none. And like I remember that there was a strike recently at mine, which actually was won by the workers, and it was like I don't remember as like an actual straight up strike, because there were so-called Italian strikes, right? You know what that means?
No, I don't know what Italian strikes are.
Okay, so that's like basically when you keep working but very slowly, and with like you make
Oh,
sure uh, to act just like according to every single part of everything, like to never, be too safe, right? To never go have more hours than you should, and things like
oh.
that.
So you continue working, but you kind of slow things down and do the bare minimum, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's this kind of thing.
Right. Is the idea of that strategy to ensure that people don't have a reason to get fired, or is it to try?
Yeah, like basically they can't really legally fire you, and it's more and you also continue to have an income during
Right.
the strike, so it's basically like less risky than a regular strike.
I see. I see. Right.
So that's what, like, I helped organize the strike with like our, yes, I forgot the word for like operators of these things, of like crane operators, and we help organize the strike because like they work in terrible conditions often, like they don't get paid for over time. Sometimes it's really hot in like this
Right.
cabin in summers,
Really? Wow.
and
Yeah.
like 8 or 10 hours, so it's unbearable. To say that like now they're paid more, and like I think it's 3 zlotys an hour more, and they have climatization, air cooling, so air conditioning is lower, so
Right.
like at least on paper, so it's better than it used
Right.
to.
So, from that perspective, would you say that strikes in Poland are still an effective method of securing economic advancement for the workers? Do you think they have a legitimate role? Do they actually achieve anything significant?
Yes, like I think they can often achieve something significant, but they're used very rarely. Basically, like there was this Italian strike and this like full-on strike in this mine, and like about this mine, as I said, I don't remember something like that where there was a strike and it was a complete success, like happened my whole life. I
Right.
mean, maybe something that I missed it, and basically it was like the biggest thing among leftists that happened during that month, and the next month we were still talking about it.
Right. Is there much of a debate in leftist circles then about appropriate or effective action to take? Do some people say, "Oh, I'm not supporting those strikes. They're so bourgeois. They don't get anywhere. They're just performative." Or is there a bit more unity among leftists in terms of what action people should take?
I mean, like, strikes are largely supported by basically everyone on the left, and then any other strategy, this huge conflict where, like, in these memes where basically it's girls changing room and normal and boys changing room, and it's like some sort of battle. Basically, like, right wingers changing room, normal left wingers changing room, and it's people arguing
Oh, really?
whether. Oh, yes. And especially if we count, the center left people, because they often just go and say, like, for example, you can't do that, that's illegal. No, illegal is even if no, you can insult the police.
Oh, yeah, right. Now, that's an interesting point. Since you mentioned that Poland's moving to a more authoritarian style government, is there any form of I mean, even though it is slightly leftist-ish, as you described it, or something like it,
Yeah, yeah.
is there an active suppression of leftist activism in Poland at the moment?
Well, there is some, but not that much surprisingly. I mean, when there were like more big-scale protests throughout Poland during the nationwide women's strike in 2019 and 2020, there was a lot of suppression of like protests in general. They were not like only leftist, but mainly. And nowadays, the police still will attack people and, well, yes, and try to stop them, but it's rather unusual that they would get into quite a fight. But I'm also speaking from Warsaw, where there's like a lot of media coverage for basically everything. So, it's somewhat of a privileged position because the
Right.
media isn't watching the police treats people worse than
Right.
when media is.
If you're sort of somebody who's known as a leftist, you can be publicly out as a leftist and no one's going to particularly get on your case. But if you're involved in some more direct and public action, you might get kind of swept up in the overall net of
Yeah.
work of suppression.
I mean, if you're like into direct action, then you'll certainly have some problems with the police, at least,
Right.
because, well, which direct action often is.
Yeah.
And if you're like an open leftist, then you might get some hate on the internet or some stupid stuff. But no one will really go out of their way to, like, basically to harass you like in real life usually. Although it did
Right.
happen that an anarchist queer activist was like thrown under a tram.
Oh, wow. That's a bit serious.
Like
Yeah.
a huge, and it was like a huge thing. I mean, nothing happened to her, but still, like, it was basically, everyone was talking about it. But like,
Right.
a lot of people claim that it didn't happen, despite the fact that very much did.
Yeah, I see. So probably the extent to which you're going to get harassed is likely to be more or less proportional to your actual influence and practical effect or success, right?
Yeah, like largely that. I mean, there's like basically it's like that. You'll also get some support from people that you helped or other leftists, but
Oh, yeah.
largely, yeah, but largely, like people on the internet or on the street are not gonna be very nice to you.
Right, right. Most people probably just have other things to do, right?
Yeah, like obviously, but but like right wing has a lot of trolls on the internet who will just
Oh,
find their
I
way to
see. Right, I get it.
people. It's usually not like very horrible.
If I can move on to the next question, and feel free to answer this as much or as little as you prefer. What are your views on the Soviet annexation of Poland and generally on the subsequent Soviet era?
Basically, Soviets tried the Polish socialist movement. It's like the pro-independence movement during the German occupation was largely like socialist and also communist to a degree. Basically, like there were many uprisings and partisan actions, and like the biggest one was the Warsaw Uprising, and this thing where like people were fighting Germans and they took control of several quarters of the city,
Mm,
and like the Soviets were on the other side of the river, and they just waited until Germans have destroyed the Polish resistance, which the Poles didn't expect.
right,
And then later, basically, there was like the Polish Socialist Party, still had many people in it, and like they were one of the main driving forces. And so the Polish Communist Party made this great reunification with them, when basically all the socialist leaders were thrown in jail for not supporting Soviets. Like the Soviet Union basically like also took over like the worker co-ops and project that were appearing
mm,
throughout Poland after the war, just and like obviously there was this, so and then it was authoritarian, so that sucked. Like they were comparatively like left wing economically to what we have now or used to have like after the fall. And so that's somewhat appreciated, but like they weren't left wing enough and they weren't democratic at all, obviously. So that was really bad. And like they were against, and also a very big thing that they did was 1968, which was globally a pretty significant year. Like there came a huge like anti-Semitic action from the government when they were against this aggressive Zionist element, in triple parentheses, obviously, and
Mm.
like lots of Jews were thrown away from Poland, or many were basically forced to go to Israel, which I kind of I don't know, which I mean, as an anarchist, obviously, probably know what I think about
Yeah,
Israel.
sure.
Not very good. So and like my great aunt said Poland at that time, like my grandmother decided to stay, and she was like already involved in anti-government actions at that
Wow.
point. While great aunt, her sister, like fled the country to Austria, and well, she lives there to this day. And a lot of my family are now in Israel and the USA or just like they were thrown out of Poland. So
Mm.
that was the big thing. And later on, like expressed like workers' strikes and trade unions, which like obviously I don't appreciate a lot.
Right.
And like what came after was not good either, obviously, because then there came the Balcerovich's plan, which was basically a set of reforms from 1989 to like 1994 or 5, let's say, which basically like privatized most of Poland. Like,
Oh, yeah. This was post-Soviet, right?
yeah, it was like post-Soviet already.
That is actually extremely similar to a video I saw on a Polish anarchist channel a few months back. It was in Polish, but it had English subtitles, and it was extremely informative. And I actually ended up contacting the
Oh
creator.
yeah, that's the one you had on your channel, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. It was brilliant. The historical detail was amazing. I was absolutely fascinated. The level of detail and information in it was incredibly helpful to me because I had no idea of all these different layers of the history and everything that was going on. I obviously had the idea that the Soviet era wasn't exactly picnic time for Poland, but it was actually a whole lot worse than I even expected.
I
And then,
also learned on that actually.
how much of this do you actually get in school education?
The part where it wasn't democratic, probably.
Oh, really? That's it? Wow.
No, obviously, like you get that, like they were left economically, and you also get thought about the 1968 action, but like you don't really get thought about what they did to the Polish socialist movement or like the
Oh,
trade.
that's interesting.
And you get taught what they did against Solidarność, but it's basically shown like as if Solidarność was some sort of a liberal movement, which at least at the beginning it completely wasn't.
Yeah, I
And
see.
like, nowadays it's getting even worse. How like they were totally anti-Christian people, and like the opposition was all Christian and stuff like that. And it's getting like even worse than it already is. But oh, you also get taught about how they basically like mm, they action during the Warsaw Uprising.
Right, right. So,
So that
fairly
like
politically biased presentation of the history then.
in schools you're not also taught that like the leaders of the Warsaw Uprising were socialists largely, and like most members of it were leftists, and many people were taking part in it were Jewish also, because like even just like later on and just after the war, Poland actually still had a rather significant Jewish presence, but it was like completely like currently it doesn't exist because firstly after war there came pogroms, and
Right.
later after pogroms there came 1968 when Jews were thrown out, and for most it was too much. Like who most of those who could fled Poland, and
Right.
those who couldn't. And
Yeah.
many, also converted to Christianity. And nowadays, it's people, like finding out that they are actually Jewish and contacting like Jewish community center or the synagogue to like learn about their past more.
Right. Right. So, regaining their historical identity. Okay, let's move on to our next question. What are your personal views on the Polish Solidarność movement?
So on the Solidarność movement, well, the original movement, like the workers' trade union and like supporters of workplace democracy, they were actually like they were really good and brave people. But later on, as during the martial law, as they called it, they were they changed into this political, liberal, and super Christian also movement. Like they felt worse, and like nowadays, it's like a shadow of what Solidarność used to be once. Like,
Right,
because this, but it mainly just exists to hate on gay people.
right. I
And
see.
not, generally, but that's most a lot of what they do.
So you think that the movement eventually became kind of watered down, essentially, into
Yeah,
a more liberal and effectively less threatening
yeah,
movement?
yeah. I mean, obviously, like they still got this democracy, which is very much appreciated, but like they also got rid of, like, for example, building houses in Poland. Now there's so-called pato developer, or pathological developers. We build like these completely tragic places, sell them like really expensively, and like houses and blocks and etc. get privatized like all the time. Like
Mm,
nowadays, how it has slowed down due to like a law being passed. Like was I think like 2 weeks ago only that like the so-called wild privatization has stopped in Warsaw and like still happening in other places.
would you say that there is any possibility of reviving that particular movement, or would you say that's kind of done and we really need to start something new? I mean, that maybe, for want of a better term, the brand has lost its value.
I think like it's more of the second option, like because like the brand of Solidarność, there is this trade union still exists and it's really conservative nowadays and
Right.
it's still like associated with like a lot of like this political Christianity and often conservatism and economic liberalism. So like if we want to like create a new like dem- demo- movement for workplace democracy, it would need to be something else than
Right.
reviving Solidarity.
Yep. So would you say it's essentially been gradually co-opted, so it's no longer useful?
Yes, I mean it wasn't exactly fault of like the people who nowadays have it, but the fault of the Polish communist government, which basically destroyed the workers' movement during
Right.
martial law. But like yes,
I
like
see.
nowadays the term is like it's not what Solidarność is not what it used to like you know in my times we had a real Solidarność.
Okay, let's move along to our next question then. What are your views on the departure of Poland from the Soviet bloc? Obviously, that had positive sides and negative sides, and obviously, a lot of leftists rightly focus on the negative consequences. But I'm talking about the actual departure. Do you think it was the right thing for Poland to leave the Soviet bloc, regardless of whatever happened later?
Well, I think like leaving the Soviet bloc was the right decision because the Soviet bloc wouldn't really tolerate
Right.
democratic country
Yeah.
among its like closest allies. You know,
Yeah.
Poland was like just geographically close to the Soviet Union,
Yep.
so like it would be extremely difficult to keep any sort of democracy and diplomatic relations. And like what's happened in
Yeah.
Czechoslovakia and
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I've got friends from the Czech Republic. Yeah.
I think like that a similar thing might have happened in Poland,
Mm.
that it's not like Soviet bloc, like with like the Western bloc, like helping Poland, obviously not out of the goodness of their hearts, like
Right.
like not naive, but like because it was in their interest to weaken
Yeah.
the Soviet Union,
Of
they
course.
couldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we both know that, of course, Western assistance for Poland during that separation was obviously highly motivated by geopolitical and, frankly, military interests.
Yeah, like it wasn't like
It
not
wasn't. It
just
wasn't charity. That's for sure. Yeah. Then, what are your views on the current socio-political situation in Poland? Do you feel kind of positive, negative, or generally meh?
I'm negative, and especially like this. I think I should talk about this because currently there are a few groups of Afghan and Iraqi refugees on the Polish-Belarusian border, and like the Polish government was like, we're not gonna play into Lukashenko's game, and
Mm,
because he probably wants us to let them in, and they basically built like a lot of barbed wire and
right.
told the guard to keep them away, and like nowadays like a lot of these refugees are just thrown from like the Polish border guard gets them and like ships them back to Belarus, and then the Belarusian border guard throws them back to Poland. They are beaten. They like for actually about the barbed wire, I have a nice image with it.
Hmm.
So I'll send it to you because
Oh
like I
wow, that
appreciate.
barb. Wow, that's serious barbed wire.
Yeah, like, I mean, but about and for a long time people like the border guard would just stop people from providing food, hygienic products, water,
Wow.
and even medical assistance to these refugees. I think I've read that like the Belarusian gave them some food and apparently cigarettes, which it probably again wasn't out of goodness of Lukashenko's heart, right? It might have been initiated for like individual soldiers or maybe like a propaganda effort.
Yeah.
While many people are protesting to let these refugees in or to like at least give them humanitarian aid,
Yeah. Of
and like
course.
obviously, I mean, polls show that like actually people want to let them in, but well, the government and internet trolls won't shut up about how we shouldn't. Like, also there was like the leader of the Civic Coalition, at least the biggest opposition party, quote, is tweeted that basically Poland should protect its borders and not let them in, and like basically currently on, but there's some disagreement within the party because some like liberal groups are providing them with food and other products, are trying to at least to give them some aid to
Right.
these refugees. And well, one politician from a centrist group basically said that the border, like it's a very minor party, he said that the border guard are trash for not letting these people in and not letting give them aid, to which this all hell broke loose in the public debate, because obviously like it's worse when someone insults people than when people get tortured. So this, and well, no, there isn't much about this to add. Like obviously there is like a lot of attacks on queer people as usual. There are the so-called LGBT-free zones, which
Oh
are
really? Yeah.
just decided to say that like this city or this voivodstvo or this powiat is an LGBT-free zone, and like it doesn't have any legal power, but it's
Yeah. There's enough
it's not
social pressure. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. There's like enough of homophobia and like officially, like the government says that it's about combating the LGBT ideology.
Yeah.
What that means?
Yeah. Exactly.
That it's about stressing queer rights, and like the EU actually is like the województwo małopolskie, which is like a really big administrative region in Poland. Basically, no, they said that they will stop giving them funding, like if they stop being if they don't stop being an LGBT free zone,
Mm-hmm.
which basically the same week they would be voted for like whether or not to leave the LGBT free zone, and they didn't.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's just horrible, like hearing about gender ideology, and also they call it like cultural Marxism, which like
Oh, yes. The old cultural Marxism. Yeah.
yeah, good old cultural
Yeah.
Marxism. They call people who like support queer rights communists or fascists, or
Yeah.
like being called a communist. Everyone gets the communist.
I think it's funny that cultural Marxism used to be the big buzz term, right? For years.
Yeah,
And I think the only reason why you don't hear it so much these days is that now everybody's complaining about critical race theory. it's it's always
yeah,
something. It's always something, isn't it? Right?
yeah. In Poland we don't have many people of color, so
Right, right. At least maybe you won't be hearing about that.
yeah, like we keep on hearing about the cultural Marxism.
Yeah, right. Well, I guess especially in Poland with its historical background, probably anything with the word Marx in it has a lot more potential for
Yeah,
repugnance, right? It's a much better
basically,
slur.
like Poles, hate Germans because they used to pay in marks.
Oh, right,
Yeah, like everything with the word Marx, like sounds really bad or
right.
communist or socialist or
Yep.
whatever. Like, and also, I mean, there's no sex education in Poland except in some private schools.
Oh, really? No secular education, really?
No sex
Oh,
education.
sex.
There
I
is
was going to say secular education. That would surprise me. No
this,
sex education. Actually, no sex education. That surprises me even more.
I mean, there is something that's supposed to actually play the role of sex education, but it's called like being raised to preparing to raise a family. It's called like it's the
Oh, yeah.
investigation.
You can
So
pretty
like
much. You can already see where that's going.
yeah, like
Oh,
like very transphobic, like stuff like all boys like girls.
yeah. I
Boys
see.
boys
Yep.
share, girls are more
Right.
fragile. Like it's just so big that basically my uh, my primary school teacher, who is not a leftist by any means, like he
Right.
read with. My mom told me that like he had to lead like the first lesson of this, and like he read from the book, right? And blah blah blah. Girls are fragile, boys have to be strong, love, family, and like those. And but you all know that it's nonsense,
Oh,
right?
wow. So even he thought
I
it was
mean,
nonsense.
yeah, like I mean, he's not like a conservative really either, but like it's far from like any kind of leftist or a
Yeah.
queer activist, and
Basically,
like
encouraging people to be patriotic breeders.
yeah, basically that
Right.
stuff.
That actually leads conveniently on to our next question. What can you tell us about rights for marginalized groups in Poland, in particular LGBTQ groups?
Obviously, from what we've heard already, I'm not going to say a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, right.
I mean, as I already said, there's quite a lot of anti-Semitism in Poland, but like the most prevalent form of bigotry, like it's either patriarchy or prejudice against people from basically anywhere to the east of Poland,
Okay,
mainly like
so patriarchy and racism, two of the most prominent forms of
yes,
bigotry.
yes, but like it's not straight up like regular race, like you would see it, because often it's less targeted against people of color, like
Right,
especially like or Asian people. It's less so targeted at that, although obviously there's still a lot of race towards
right.
like black people and East Asian people. Like it's mainly against like Ukrainians, Russians, Belarus.
Oh, really? Like other Eastern
Yes,
Europeans?
yes, and like also towards Arab people.
Oh, right.
So
Okay.
it's very often like targeted at other Eastern European people that like in like some slightly progressive circle you won't hear like anyone say the N word, but what you
Right.
say about Ukrainian people or Russian people,
So,
sometimes for
okay. Why the specific animosity towards Ukrainian and Russian people then? Is that related to the Soviet era stuff or what?
it somewhat at least it's related to Soviet to the Soviet era because like Russia was this gigantic influence in Poland, so it's not
Sure.
really people don't tend to like Russia,
Right.
or unfortunately it also translates to individual Russians, and
Right.
somewhat it's because of plain old classism, because migrants from race tend to get like paid less and do like menial labor mainly, so people tend to stereotype them based on
Right.
existing stereotypes of poor people. So that's
Yeah.
another big thing that plays into it.
Right. So
And
it's a bit intersectional then. There's a class issue as well as an ethnic issue.
yeah, that's certainly that combines really well. I wouldn't say well, it combines really awfully together.
Right.
Really, but it's even worse combination. And well, there's also the thing about like Poland having historically fought many wars against Russia and
Yeah.
well, against Ukraine, because Ukraine is a relatively young country, but still also many of them
Right.
are Belarus. So there's also that.
Yep.
So
Yep.
we create this like an animosity and a lot of bigotry among people, unfortunately.
Right. Now, it's interesting you should say that. I mean, you're talking about the animosity towards Arab people. Is that mainly ethnic, or do you think it's mainly religious, with the perception of Arabs as relating to Islam, in contrast to, of course, the inherent Christian conservatism?
Like, I'm not sure here actually. I mean, there's a lot of hatred towards like Muslims, like of
Right.
any color, like that there's a lot of ethnic prejudice as well against
I
Arabs.
see. So a bit of a
I'm
combination, probably.
not sure which is more prevalent.
Right. I did notice the couple of times that I went to Poland, and I mean, frankly, I have some friends who are quite socially conservative, and they're the guys who want to get back to the old gods and stuff. I mean, they don't even they're so conservative they don't even have time for Christianity. And then the other hand, I've got friends who are like very, not to be insulting to them, but liberal. They think that Poland should be reaching out to the EU. So I've got kind of friends on both sides, but especially the more conservative ones. I was amazed to hear them talk about the Ottoman Empire like it was around yesterday. There's this really, I mean, at least among this group of friends that I was talking to, you can't get through a conversation without hearing about the winged hussars. It's like all the wars against the Muslims were just like last week. So I was wondering if that played a part in this, anti-Arab sentiment. I really just don't know. Because I thought it was so bizarre. It's like literally 300 years ago.
Yeah, like it's really weird. Like not.
I mean, it's like the Crusades. I mean, it's like if English people ranting about the Crusades, which some of them do, but only the absolute nutters,
Yeah, like I mean, like if they were ranting against French people because of the 100 Years' War. Like, I mean,
Good grief.
Yeah, I mean, like it doesn't. I mean, it's not common among like most people who don't know history that
Yeah.
well. Also, like among some like far right people, it does sometimes happen that like we used to have a war against like 500 years ago, so now we hate them.
Yeah, yeah.
Like looking for justification for being bigots than like actually having an.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so it's really just fairly typical far right wing historical nostalgia and using historical grievances as a validation of basically modern prejudice, which doesn't have a legitimate or logical grounding, right? Fairly basic foundation for fascism stuff.
Yeah. Also, actually, since it's a fascism, like in Poland, obviously it's rare to find someone who describes themselves as a fascist because firstly it's illegal.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes, it's illegal to quote unquote promote the totalitarian practices of communist and fascist state.
Oh, that's an interesting phrase. Communist and fascist, right?
Yeah,
Mm.
basically, like you. So therefore, and also because Poland had this war with the Nazi Germany when fascists were, not really on the Polish side. So even these like really far right people won't say they're fascists because like they the fascists were still on the other side and the fascists were German and Italian. So they also hate them because they're really far right people hate basically everyone who's not
Yeah,
Polish and
sure.
most Polish people as well. It was like I feel like I think a week ago or so, like I was blocking a far right march through Warsaw and like actually there were a lot of people who were like hiling, which does happen unfortunately, even among those who say they're not fascists, and saying that like anti-fascism is an illness,
Oh, wow, really?
basically being open fascists, which is like completely wild. Like I didn't think this
Yeah,
really happens in Poland, like, and it did that, which was pretty surprising. It wasn't a very big group, but still, like, it was like really shocking that they were openly saying they're fascists
right.
because normally fascists say they're not fascists. No,
Of course, yeah.
I should not be less a terrorist. I'm not a fascist. Fascists were left wing.
Yeah, yep, yep. All the old stuff, yeah. Now, moving back to history, since leaving the Soviet bloc, Poland has seen a huge increase in the number of Polish economic migrants leaving to work elsewhere in Europe, especially in the UK. As I mean, obviously, as I noticed every time I visited my family back there. Do people in Poland have any view on this? Is this seen as a positive thing or a negative thing? I mean, it obviously has to influence the economy, right?
I mean,
Uh,
yes, like it influences the economy and the population because a lot of young people are leaving. More old people inside than young people, which is like generally getting older, and also makes the workforce somewhat smaller. But like on a positive note for Poland, they tend to bring more money in because they send money
money
to
back, yeah.
yeah send money back to their families in Poland, and like they tend to earn more like Western European in
Okay.
Poland, and like there are like some discussions about it, but like most people like see it as like a good thing that they can go there, and then it's better that like people can travel that they than if they couldn't, obviously,
Sure.
and like some people try to like say about how Polish economy is Poland's back, so people are leaving, which I'm
Right.
not gonna say
Right.
it's a lie, but like if you leave Poland because it's terrible, then why do you move to the UK?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. That demographic shift that you talked about, obviously, more of the younger generation moving out, leaving more of the older people back in Poland. Do you think that that has the effect of, at least to some extent, retarding social progress in Poland, given that older people tend to be more conservative and younger people tend to be more liberal or progressive?
Probably yes, but like I'm not sure if it's like a big influence
Yeah,
because
yeah. I don't know exactly how many people are involved here, so I don't really know myself. But yeah, I would guess it would have to be a very large number of people moving.
like and also I wanted to say something. Oh right, there's basically this thing like that right wing people tend to say like Poland for Poles and like they add like England for English and Poles, right? Because they wanna immigrate, just they don't wanna people to immigrate to Poland.
Oh, so the more right wing people don't want Poles going overseas and to other
And
countries.
no, like usually actually they're really not that opposed to it. They just don't want people coming into Poland.
Oh,
Other
so they're more
people, not,
concerned with people coming into Poland.
yeah, than
Well, yeah, I mean, if they're right
there
wing bigots, that
are
kind of makes sense. Yeah.
some concerns for people leaving, but they're not as big as concerns for people going in, and
Right.
like that's the thing, and like leftists just tend to be like more moderate people at least good at
Yeah.
Poland, so we should make it better so that people don't leave and
Yeah,
you know
exactly. Exactly. You want to
yeah,
improve conditions so people don't have to move in the first place.
yeah like that would certainly be a better solution than like complaining about people leaving and then not letting other people in also.
Now, moving on to the last question. What do you think are the most significant misconceptions non Polish people have about Poland's past and present? Or I don't know, maybe you don't know. I don't know myself, but that's
I'm not
because
exactly sure. I'd say that a lot of people think that Poland is like that Poland actually used to be like far more important than it is,
oh
which
really?
I'm not sure where exactly this comes from, but like basically they view Poland as it used to be like a superpower during the Middle Ages and stuff like that, which is like nonsense.
Yeah, I
And
see.
also what I'm seeing nowadays is like that is partly due to like the activity of Polish trolls on the internet. Basically,
Yeah,
people claim the LGBT free zones don't exist because you have like an article about the LGBT free zones, and like all the comments are like Polish people saying that they don't exist. Like,
right. I see. I see.
do and well, so that's like a really wild thing. This I have no idea where this came from. I mean, they just go and say like they don't exist, so them do the fact that they do exist, or like things like that. And also like when people like on the right especially view Poland as sort of like homogeneous ethno state, which is absolutely not true because like Polish people are white in general, but they're you know various groups. You know there are
Yeah,
Ashkenazi Jews, there are
sure.
Poles, there are North Silesians, Roma people, Ukrainians. You know like actually quite diverse despite all of them being like all of them would be white if it was in the US and they would be all the same, but
Yeah,
since it's Poland is not like the US, for example, then they all like are all bigoted against each other.
yeah. Do Polish people make very fine ethnic distinctions between each other?
Well, it depends because like if you have more like progressive or even just liberal or left-wing people, then they don't tend to go around that.
Yeah.
But like you get more right-wing people, then like even like more moderate, they're not a Pole because they're a Jew. Like
Oh,
that
yeah.
Messian, that person is Roma, that person is a German, that
Yeah,
person is a Roma, and like Polish like ultra nationalists are
I
basically
see.
saying,
Yeah. So those are the
okay,
people, they're more likely to want to give you a blood test or something crazy.
yeah, so not like that basically.
Right.
Or like I remember when like a guy appeared on the TV and basically like everyone talking about him in the comments like it was a post on Facebook about like the comments were saying how for example he has Jewish eyes
Oh my
or
goodness. Wow.
some nonsense like that like not everyone knows we just like generally think
I don't even know what that means.
I have no idea what Jewish eyes mean. And by the way like that dude is not Jewish.
Oh my goodness. Well, that shows how much they know. Wow.
Yeah, but maybe he's got some Jewish blood in him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What can you say?
maybe he's going through the conversion and the
Yeah.
eyes have already converted over to Judaism.
Yeah, right. Well, this has been extremely informative. I really appreciate you taking the time out to do this. And as you'll see from my channel, I think it's really important to get voices on the ground of people in these places. I get really irritated when people online, especially leftists, frankly, talk about places and they don't provide a voice from the place that they're talking about. And if they're not there, then, I'm kind of like, leftists are always fighting over places like Cuba and things like that, but it's
Yeah,
mainly people who live outside those places who are having the arguments. And
yeah, but
for someone outside like me, it's like, well, frankly, I need a source of information from the people on the ground. I'd like to hear you quote them, but they don't. And then I'm thinking, what are you actually doing here? I'm not really here for your opinion. I want to know what's
yeah,
going on.
yeah, but like the thing I find really annoying about these arguments is basically when like the more quote unquote authoritarian people say that you're racist for not liking China or Cuba
Yeah,
because
yeah,
they have approval rating and like I'm sure they do, but like we all know they're not real, like
yeah,
because like it wasn't a democracy. They like when people on the internet really claim that something like the USSR was a democracy. Like I don't know like even what to do. It's less as if someone was claiming that the Earth is flat. I don't
yeah,
know how to argue with someone like that. Just like no, it wasn't.
yeah, yeah, that's right. I get enough of this as it is myself, living in Taiwan and
Yeah.
seeing so many leftists telling other people about Taiwan, and I'm thinking, I've lived here for 17 years, and what you're saying is complete trash. And why do you even
Yeah.
think? Why do you even think that you have any kind of idea about what's going on here? Yeah, that kind of thing really irritates me.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been to China plenty of times myself to see friends and for business, so I've been there in social capacity, and I've been there in a business capacity, and I know quite a lot about the place. And I certainly know a lot about how people in Taiwan view China. And it just really irritates me when leftists feel like they can speak authoritatively about places that they've never been to, and especially without actually quoting voices on the ground. That's why that Polish channel, when I found that Polish Anarchist channel, I'm thinking, oh, for goodness sake, wow, this is amazing. What an education I'm getting from these guys. Finally, That's why I wanted to signal boost that particular video, because I thought it was brilliant. And it told me a whole bunch of stuff that I'd never known before. I mean, I'd known obviously about the Solidarność movement. I was literally alive when it was going. I mean, I was born in 1973, right? So I lived through the Cold War, big chunk of it, right? Oh, and by the way, my father was, for at least some time, a member of the Australian Communist Party. So, I mean, I come from a very lefty background myself.
Yeah, that's good. But like how you also were talking about basically how leftists go around telling stuff about racism, and like I find it funny, like with really with more moderate people like democratic socialists, mainly from the US, but also from Poland, they tend to like say stuff like, but they say stuff, for example, like most of the world already does socialism, or
Oh, yeah.
Polish like moderate left of often views the Western Europe as some sort of Valhalla where
Yeah.
there are problems, things perfect with rights or fair for right economies.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
gets annoying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I'm really interested in listening to and helping to platform views of people like yourself who can provide boots on the ground eyewitness testimony of what's going on. And yeah, sure, no one's saying, well, sure, you and I are not saying that you're the authority on Poland, but your perspective on Poland means a whole lot more than somebody who doesn't even live there.
Yeah, someone who doesn't live there did like 5 minutes of research on Wikipedia.
Exactly. And more to the point, you are, as a result of your own social position in Poland, you are a lot more likely to be affected by government policy and social attitudes. So you're the kind of person who is literally the to-go person to understand how these issues are really having a material effect. This is not theory for you. This is day-to-day experience.
Yeah, like that's also like how people talk about like the left should concentrate on class issues and cultural issues, right?
Yeah.
That like cultural issues are also like material.
Yeah,
And it's stuff that
exactly. Yep.
like when Slavoj Žižek said that like yes, like the most good for the proletariat of all European parties in the 21st century, and like no, they didn't. Like
Yeah.
for white male cishet working class, perhaps not for white Polish, obviously, like not for example, like Ukrainian working class or queer working class or
Sure.
women were working. No, no, they didn't.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, there's a line to be trodden very carefully between class reductionism on the one hand and race reductionism on the other. And,
Yeah,
so many of the online leftists seem to fall into one of the two camps. And I'm thinking, it shouldn't be that difficult to figure out that there's a literal middle path here.
yeah, like we're centrists now, right?
Yeah, I know. That's so annoying. It's like, no, it's not a question of centrism. It's a question of nuance. The people who are taking all factors into account, right?
Yeah.
Everybody agrees these are factors, but there's no point in jumping on one and then ignoring the other. We should realize that both of these factors apply, but they apply differently to different people in different situations.
Yeah, and they're also often very intertwined. Like
Exactly.
That's the intersectionality. Like when I see like intersectional people complain about like quote unquote class reduction when anyone
Yeah,
mentions class. Like
yeah,
like we get a lot of this exactly like left, as I said, people who are like very concentrated on their social views but completely ignore class nature, right? Like really right
yeah.
economically, like just can't stand them because like, and then the radical left often just go like is pushed by that, and they often will, like, not often but sometimes they will go out of their way, like say, like I heard like a guy from my church told me that the queer rights and stuff and feminism and stuff like that is just social stuff, cultural,
Yeah.
both, and like it's more important, like it's not unimportant, we shouldn't concentrate on that.
I'd like to thank you again for all the effort you've put into this long conversation. I really appreciate the time you've taken out of your day to do this and to provide me with a deep insight into Polish society, both past and present, and to provide my viewers with a nuanced perspective of Polish society from somebody who is not only a leftist but deeply affected by socio-political and economic currents in the country today. As an invitation to my viewers, if any of you are interested in providing a leftist perspective on your own country, please contact me directly through my channel. Finally, I'd like to thank my generous patrons: Dusty Bob, The Boots Are On, Elias Asvig, Juran Barnett, Alexander Curzon, Shawnee Young, Andy Chaos, TBLTP, Thors, Fake Name, Niels Rethelin, Judge Sabo, Matthew Simmerall, Martin T, Ben Lindquist, John Larkin, Jack C, Ezekiel Stacy, Love You More, Noah French, and Aaron Johnson. Please contact me if I ever pronounce your name incorrectly.